This is Johan Rockström, Director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and Professor in Earth System Science at the University of Potsdam. He's an internationally recognized scientist on global sustainability issues and led the development of the Planetary Boundaries Framework for Human Development in the current era of rapid global change. Johan is active as a consultant for several governments and business networks. He also acts as an advisor for sustainable development issues at international meetings, including the World Economic Forum and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change conferences.
Hello, Johan Rockström. Thanks for joining us. We have asked you to look forward from your perspective.
Yes, thanks, and great to be with you. And in a way, I'll kind of connect directly to Anders' really important summary points here on the challenges. And what I'd like to summarize with you is not to dig at all into the diagnostic, but at least start just to remind us that the IPCC 6 assessment puts, let's say, the final piece of evidence in place, if it ever was missing, that we're now at a transformative moment. We have what I call entered the decisive decade for humanity's future on Earth. This is the decade when we need to cut global emissions by half, all 195 countries, and the IPCC confirms this, confirms that we have the task set in front of us now. We have only 400 billion tons of carbon dioxide remaining in the global carbon budget to have a 2/3 chance of landing within the climate planetary boundary of 1.5. And the only way of having this budget remaining for us is if we are able to close the material cycle that Anders referred to. It is if we're able to secure the nature carbon sinks, all the carbon sinks in oceans and land. Otherwise, we lose the budget. So what will this require then for us to achieve in Glasgow? And I have a 5-point list that kind of complements quite a bit, I think, the discussions you've had during the course of today. And I would argue that the number one most low-hanging fruit to decide upon at Glasgow, which must happen actually, even though it's not properly on the agenda, is to have an agreement to end coal. But this must be the moment when we say goodbye to yesterday's provision of energy from the most kind of climate damaging source of fossil fuels, namely coal. And there has to, of course, be an orderly phase out, and the message to the world must be that we now will help each other across all nations to be able to land away from coal, and no more investments in coal should be allowed after Glasgow. I would suggest that we also need an agreement to have an end date on all fossil fuel investments, and again, an orderly, efficient, rapid, and fair phase out, which will require a lot of financial transitions from the north to the south. But this must be the COP of the end date. The second kind of future-oriented step is obviously what also was discussed in your chat with Anders, that to avoid rebound, to avoid the Jevons paradox, we need to set a price on carbon. You need regulatory measures, but also a price, because we risk otherwise to have a rapid transition to electric mobility in Europe, but then you'll have all the diesel cars shipped over to other economies because we won't have the leveling playing field on internalizing all the externalities. Can this be done? Well, I think yes. I think we're seeing the movement now with more and more countries, more than 50 across the world. I mean, big economic regions, European Union being the largest, where we are setting a price on carbon. And as you know, today we have a 60 euros per ton of carbon dioxide in the European trade emission scheme, which is quite a remarkable step, showing impacts already on temporary shutdown of coal-fired plants in Germany, Poland, and the Baltic states. The third step would be, of course, the financial step. We simply need to fill up very rapidly the Global Climate Fund, which is very positive that the Biden administration is now showing its step forward here. But we also need massive mobilization on investments, not only in fossil fuel technology and transfer of fossil fuel technology help for the developing countries, but we also need nature climate solutions to be scaled at the level of similarly hundreds of billions of US dollars, and this has been quantified quite in detail to roughly 700 billion as a necessary step to get all the nature climate solutions in place. Now, is that a big number? Well, it's not. It's a very small number compared to the 15 trillion that have been put on the table for COVID recovery across the economies. The fourth must-have in Glasgow, which I think we all really agree on, is that Glasgow is the moment to integrate the nature and climate agendas. That this must be the moment where we take a systems take on solving the climate crisis. If we don't secure the carbon sinks in land and ocean-based ecosystems, we will fail on Paris. And if we don't get material cycling and all the non-CO2 gases to follow the same pathway of decarbonization, we will also fail on landing in a manageable state for the climate. So we need this to be the grand moment for investments in safeguarding the carbon sinks in nature, and it has to be both oceans and land-based ecosystems. And then finally, the fifth one, which is the legally binding one. This was a decision already in Paris, that 5 years after Paris, every country is obliged, according to the legally binding part of the agreement, to upgrade their nationally determined contributions, the national plans, in line with science. And this is explicit. And now we have the sixth assessment of the IPCC and the 1.5 degrees Celsius report of the IPCC, which comes after Paris, confirming that 1.5 is the planetary boundary. We cannot go beyond it. It will take much too social and economic costs. It will even take us into a domain of potentially triggering irreversible tipping points. At 2 degrees Celsius, we will irreversibly commit all future generations to over 10 meters sea level rise on the long term. So this is the turning point. And here we need to really put pressure. All the countries must align, because 2 days ago, the United Nations Framework Convention confirmed that even with the positive developments we see so far, we're heading towards 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. Now, 2.7 is a place we haven't been in for the past 5 million years. So it's not a desirable route. Are we seeing some positive notes here? Yeah, before handing over to you, to say that the US, China, and the European Union must show climate leadership here. I think this is the pivotal moment for the G3, that I would call it, the G3 on climate, to step in and show leadership. Why? Because these are the three largest economic regions. So I would kind of put the UK into the European Union mix probably, because the US has actually adopted now science-based targets on net zero by 2050. China has said net zero no later than 2060, a bit too late, but still a landing zone. And the European Union has a net zero pathway to 2050. If these three large economies can show that we're serious, putting a price on carbon, landing zone in 2050, 30 years from now, following the carbon law of cutting emissions by half every decade, this will spill over on all other economies, of course. It will be inevitable for everyone else to kind of follow on, given that the three largest economies take this step. That's what Glasgow can be about, getting this G3 to really put their heads on the line for action. And that, I would argue, are some of the 5 points that I think we should keep an eye on and keep everyone accountable on for Glasgow. Back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Johan Rockström, for joining us from Berlin. Thank you.